Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. For today's discussion, I have a very close friend and soon to be doctor, Siddhant Bhamri with me. A quick intro. So we completed our BTech from the same college, after which Siddhant moved to US for his PhD in computer science. Siddhant has also worked in multiple research groups and big tech companies as an intern and a researcher. So before we begin, thanks a lot Siddhant for taking out time for this discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Siddharth, for having me. And this is the first time that I'm going to be uh, I'm going to be a part of something like this. So yeah, I look forward to it.
Sure. So, yeah, let's get started. We'll divide today's discussion into two parts. So, first part, we'll primarily focus on how to get into a PhD program, and the second part will be then somehow manage to get it over with. From what I've seen, a lot of people are not even aware of the fact that you can actually pursue a PhD right after your bachelor's. So, how did you come to know about this opportunity? And what was your reasoning for selecting PhD over a MS program, given the longer time commitment for PhD and the rigorous coursework?
Um, so the set of people who were not aware includes me as well, since I was not sure if I first of all wanted to do a PhD, and second of all, uh, the P- joining a PhD program right after undergrad was possible. At the time, I was working at IIIT Delhi as a research intern with a couple of professors, and this was during the second year. This was second year onwards during our undergrad. There, uh, through the guidance that I got from those professors, I got to know that this was an opportunity, at least in the US. Initially, my plans were that I would want to go outside India just to gain more academic exposure. So, masters was the first thought, just like many of us would have had. However, the professors I was working with informed me that US allowed for PhDs directly after undergrad, since the coursework that you are required to do as part of a master's program, you can also do that as part of a PhD program. It definitely makes the program little more exhaustive and hectic. However, this is still a possibility that people can exploit. On the other hand, the other universities that I was initially aiming for my masters were in UK, where the requirement was that you had to do at least 1 year of coursework after an undergrad in India before you could join a PhD program. So I think there are different rules for different countries and universities, definitely. But on the overall, US definitely allows for that, and that's how I got to know about it. Coming to the second part of the question, which is as to why did I choose PhD over masters? I think why did I choose PhD? The answer to that keeps changing every year that I am going through in this program. But at least I'll definitely try to recall an answer based on what were my thoughts at the time. Uh, I ex- mostly spent time, at least during my undergrad, being part of research projects. I think one thing led to another, and that was the opportunity that I had got initially. And after that, I got inclined towards them, so I just kept trying to explore more options, more research groups that I could be a part of, or at least support at the time as an undergrad. Support the projects that were being led by the PhD students in those respective labs, to be honest. So that experience really got me very interested in the overall process of how a research project may be carried out, starting from finding a new problem, figuring out solutions, failing several times, and then finding something that works, and then finally you write your results and findings and try to publish that. So, given whatever little experience I had at the time, for whatever reasons I had, this really got me interested, and I think one of the core one of the most important suggestions or recommendations that I got from the professors I was working with was that if I am more interested in this rather than just an academic experience of getting some coursework done outside India, maybe PhD could be a better choice. And I uh, took that leap, and that's how I got here. But I think at the time that was pretty much my rationale for choosing a PhD over masters. So yeah, I guess that covers pretty much what perspective I had at the time.
Got it. So, from what I understand, it was mostly based on the interest and the passion for the field that you chose PhD. But if there's someone who's looking for a ROI also, so based on the ROI, would MS be a better option than PhD if it's not for interest and specifically for going out and getting a better job?
Absolutely, I think that I mean you asked a very important question as to what which makes me brings the point of what is the reward metric that you are essentially trying to fulfill. If your reward metric is that you're looking for a better job or you want to try and settle outside India professionally and personally as well over the long run, then maybe masters is a good choice for that time period. There are definitely other factors that you may want to consider. One of the most important ones being getting into a good university, because in masters the name of the university or the brand name definitely matters way more than other programs. Uh, then there are finances that you would have to think about, but that definitely depends person to person. But in short, yes, masters is a concise, more hectic program where from day one you would start looking for, like, if imagine if you start in August, you would look for internships for the subsequent summer, and then the next year you would immediately start looking for jobs. So it's really exhaustive and really hectic. As much as I've seen almost four batches of masters so far around me graduating as well. But yeah, that definitely is an easier choice to make if your reward metric is to settle outside professionally.
Got it. That makes sense. And like, how tough is it to get into a PhD program as compared to a master's program, or in absolute terms also how difficult it is?
I think naturally the number of um admits and applicants are lesser for PhD programs. So, without exact numbers, it may not be easy to say which one has a better acceptance rate, because they both have different number of applicants and number of admits. But intuitively, you can think of it as based on the factors that impact uh, where you want to do your PhD. One of the most important ones being looking for labs and research, essentially research groups, where you would be interested to work, the kind of work they are carrying out. Do they have openings for new PhD students? And what are the funding possibilities, naturally leading to more openings in respective groups? I think those factors definitely determine, because you may be able to find a PhD, but it may not be in the exact lab that you may have wanted. Quite a few people come join PhDs as they join the universities as PhD students. They are enrolled for the first year. For example, at ASU, at Arizona State University, where I am right now, you are allowed to do a 1 year uh, teaching assistantship, or you are funded as a TA for the first year, where you are not fixed to one particular lab, but you have the time to explore and work with different groups and interact in person, I think, which makes it a great option if you're not sure which lab to join. So there are those cases. In my case specifically, I was very uh, specific in terms of who I'm applying to for my PhD advisor at ASU, and I directly asked for a research assistantship or to be an RA from first semester. You can be either of them, but the idea was that I would only be working with that specific group, no matter where the funding comes from, either be a TA or an RA. Those are just logistical things, but essentially these factors definitely make it very subjective as to where you would want to get, where you could get in, how easy or difficult it can be. Uh, so that's pretty much what I would be able to say, at least at the moment.
Right, that makes sense. Uh, so I think I've asked a lot of MS versus PhD questions, but just last one in that regard. So what is the difference between the prospects, future prospects for someone who has completed masters and for someone who has completed a PhD program?
So I, to the limit of knowledge I would have on this topic, because since I am still a PhD student and there's still some amount of time in which I start my professional experience after my PhD. At least based on what I've seen, PhD allows you to get into research specific roles. It's hard to distinguish between just research roles or engineering roles right now, based on where the field, computer science field, is going. There will always be a mix of two. I mean, no PhD can be no PhD like student or a professional can be there at a company without any engineering requirements. So they definitely go hand in hand in that aspect. I as far as I believe, after masters, most of the roles focus on engineering only roles. Those could be, at least for computer science, those could be um, some examples include like machine learning engineer or data scientist, software development engineers, and so on and so forth. So those are at least the most common categories that I have come across. And I think that brings the question as to what do you want to do essentially. For PhDs, an additional requirement in certain companies that I have experienced is that you would be required to publish. Some companies do not require PhDs to publish as well, but allow you to work on state of the art um, frameworks, at least, even if you are not publishing. So there are pros and cons to both kinds of prospects. And depending on what you might want to do, a lot of PhDs are into product oriented roles, which are not very different from a lot of masters graduates. And quite a few of I think most of the people would work together in the same team. Very few companies have a distinction or a model where you would have a research team separate from an engineering team and they would be collaborating. One of them being Microsoft Research, at least, where I was an intern last summer 2024. um, but there are other models as well for different companies, which I may not be able to speak very confidently right now. But from what I know, quite a lot of people work together, irrespective of the professional experience that or like the academic experience they have had. Definitely, the roles in terms of decision making and who's leading the project, those things might be very different internally, which is hard to say as of now. But yeah, those are at least on a very high level the differences between the two, between the prospects that the two MS and PhD students might get later on.
Uh, That makes sense. Moving on. So, what are the basic requirements for getting into a PhD program? Like, what all do you need for your application?
So this is a very subjective question, but there are two parts to the answer that I would give here. One is the basic logistical requirements, and the other is more of, which is the more subjective part, which I'll come to it later on. At the time of my applications for ASU, at least as far as I remember, the logistical requirements included GRE scores, English proficiency exam scores, which would either include IELTS or TOEFL, one of them, and the undergrad mark sheet, essentially, the transcripts that you would require for them, statement of purpose, and letters of recommendation. Those were, I think, primarily the four or five things that were mandatorily required. Some of the universities for my PhD applications did require some additional letters, such as a research statement or a personal statement. Uh, so I think that's a very university specific rule, but the first 4 or 5 things that I mentioned are required by pretty much all applications, which are pretty much the same requirements that you would see for a master's program, but at least, but yeah, coming on to the subjective part, I think the most important thing that you would be looking for, and I think which would be given the highest weightage, is your alignment of interests with the group and the advisor that you are going to work with. This is really hard for somebody to answer in the beginning, at least as an undergrad, because uh, at least speaking from personal experience, I was interested in a couple of areas. However, I was not too sure, or I probably did not think too much if I would want to commit a long term plan towards that specific topic. So I think flexibility definitely helped me. But that's, I may be going off the tangent right now. But in general, the idea is that based on what you have done, for example, if you have some experience with respect to working with natural language processing, something that has taken off very recently, especially with because of language models such as ChatGPT coming into picture in everybody's life, daily life. So if you have done projects there during your undergrad, for example, so you may want to show that you are interested and reach out to groups and advisors that are focusing on that particular direction. And I think it's hard to say what could click, but you would want to present your best self, just like we are expected to do at every stage. If you are applying for anything, it would be a university element or a job application or anything of that sort. Um, the other point I would definitely like to mention is the emphasis on LORs. I think getting good LORs, it's not a surprising thing, but getting good LORs is really impactful. And I believe that is one of the things that really held my application admit at ASU. And the reason being that the professor I was working with at Triple IT Delhi was himself a PhD graduate from ASU about maybe 10 years back or so from now. But and that's how he told me about my current advisor, whose um, courses I was attending online at the time when I was just an undergrad. So I never knew at the time that I would be joining his lab. But anyway, so those are the most important things. Definitely, you would not want to lag behind in your grades in your undergrad, or if you're doing your masters or an MTech in India, definitely those grades do matter. Um, but this is not an objective criteria that if you are below say XGPA, you would not be getting admits. Idea is to put your best foot forward, and I guess you never know what works out. So it's good to be ambitious and also practical with respect to where you are applying and who you are applying to.
Just one thing, like you mentioned that you came to know about the your current advisor from the research group in which you were working. For someone who's not so lucky in terms of being able to directly find an advisor from someone or getting a recommendation from someone, how do they go about selecting the college or the research group?
Great question. I think before I answer that, I would say selecting an advisor is the most important decision for your PhD more than anything else, because that is the person you would be spending almost half a decade or more than that working closely one on one. So, and this is not just about technical expertise, but also at a personal level, which is some definitely hard to know about if you haven't met the person. Uh, but yeah, at least what I would like to say to answer this question is, if you're interested in a certain specific topic, look for people who are teaching that. You may be able to see the kind of interest that they have, the kind of directions they have, the kind of the kind of work that they have. Definitely look at recent publications that they are focusing on. Try to get in touch with their PhD students. As a PhD student myself, I have talked to several students who have potentially tried applying, and also to some of the current young PhD students in my lab before they were thinking of applying at ASU under the same professor. I did the same thing. I reached out to some of the senior PhDs who have now graduated in this lab, talking to them about and asking questions and talking to them about the lab in general, not just the logistics, but how the experience is with the advisor and everything. So I think reaching out definitely helped me. Uh, one thing, personally at least, but one thing I know for sure is that PhD students will be very willing to help out if they see that you are interested in a PhD program, specifically in their lab or so. And I hope other people do the same as well, because you understand the kind of commitment and seriousness somebody is bringing to the table if they are even remotely considering doing a PhD. It's clearly not an easy choice, but just to out of respect for somebody's inclination towards the program, I think it is our responsibility or to help out people who are aspiring to join the program. So that's at least the ideology that I go with. But the point is that yeah, definitely reach out, try contacting professors. They are definitely way busier than we can imagine. But reaching out to PhD students would be simpler, or for people who have already graduated, looking at research papers that the lab has published. You may not have to understand everything that is going on in the paper, what the technical points are, but the idea is to understand the wide spectrum of topics that the lab is focusing on. And if you are somewhat interested to follow on something that people are currently doing in that lab. So those are some of the objective things I think that would help.
Right. So, how do you really find the professors who are working in this area? Do you go on the faculty's page on the university's website, or do you look on Twitter? How do you really find the professor and then find the PhD students who are working under them?
Practically, this is a very important question. I totally understand it. So I do remember searching universities, at least because ASU was not the only application that I had. So I definitely remember, at least for other universities where I was not sure who I'm applying under, at least, or was not like uh, given the name of any specific person. I definitely looked at different professors in the computer science department, or even some other closely associated departments with computer science, depending on organizational structures. But the idea is that yes, look at their profiles, look at their web pages, see, and then easily you can look up their names on Google Scholar, where you can find the papers that they have been publishing. What are the which ones are the most highly cited papers that they have had that made that person influential in the field, for example. And then you could also just filter sort by the most recent papers and see what they're currently working on. So those are some of the ways that you could understand at least what are the directions that the lab is taking. Most of the professors would have some summary of what they are focusing on currently. They are really I don't think I've ever seen somebody who's not really active on keeping their web pages updated, um, um, or having some media presence where they would maybe on LinkedIn, maybe on X, and there are newer platforms coming up. But yeah, people would definitely keep their professors would definitely keep their social handles updated with respect to what they are working on, and then you can easily find the members of the group on their web pages. Um, I think I've always seen the name of the students that PhD advisors are currently working with. Uh, so it's a big deal for them as well to have PhD students. It goes both ways. So and they take pride in the PhD students that they have. So yeah, that would be the easiest way I think to figure these things out.
Sure, makes sense. So coming to the timeline part, for someone who's planning to join a PhD program, what's an ideal time for preparation and gathering all the application requirements and everything?
This is personally a very interesting experience for me because right until 2 months before the applications were due, when my third year of undergrad began, if I'm remembering correctly, I was completely into the zone of applying for master's programs. And this discussion of, oh, you can possibly consider PhD programs never happened until then. So none of my preparation or anything of that sort was specifically for PhD. And I just changed my applications to PhDs from masters pretty much in the end. So I'm not sure what is exactly what are exactly the specific things that you would want to do. But in general, a preparation time definitely, I mean, start as early as possible, for sure. Like starting and as early as making up your mind that this is what you want to do. Choosing a program, choosing a specific advisor is not something that you would want, like you would have to know from day one of your undergrad or your master's program. But the idea is that keep exploring, keep looking for options, keep seeing what different people are doing, as I said, keep reaching out, and your perspectives about the different people that you are coming across could keep changing as well. So it's an ongoing process. But practically speaking, I would suggest that 3 months before your applications are due, you should definitely have a list of the potential PhD advisors you are applying, and obviously the respective universities that you are applying to. Gather all the requirements that each of those applications have, and contact, because you would want different number of LORs for different universities at times. So you would want to exactly know which professors or people you have worked with in industry, for example, for some people who have gained some experience, you would want to contact for LORs. And so those things ideally should be figured out definitely in the last 2 or 3 months, so that your process of application goes very smoothly. Uh, Another important thing that I remember that takes quite a lot of time is statement of purpose or other statements that you may have been asked for any specific application, because that requires an iterative process. You write a draft, you keep on improving it. There's no perfect SOP, but the idea is that you definitely need time in improving the first draft that you have written for it. So I think for that specifically, starting maybe around 6 months before the admits could be a decent timeline, because you may not want to know exactly which university you're applying for. Essentially, SOP means that what is your statement? Why do you what is the purpose that you were looking for or inclined towards, as to why you are applying for a PhD program? So that can be irrespective of any universities or advices that you are applying for, and you can obviously adapt or change, update them based on the specific applications once you have finalized those towards the end, like second half of this 6 month timeline that I'm talking about. But do start preparing the SOP, because I think part of SOP is knowing who you are, what you want to do, and why you want to do it. So that should definitely take some time to give it a proper time. And I think that the other two things that I had initially mentioned were GRE and IELTS score. I think I'm not able to recall exactly, but I think you can give them maybe a year in advance or so of your applications, at least, because the scores stay valid or something like that. So I think GRE and or IELTS and TOEFL, one of those, you can get done with much earlier than all these other things that may come towards the as you come closer to the application deadlines. So yeah, I think GRE. I think I'm going back in the timeline. That is how I'm explaining it, but that is from my personal experience. But subjective. But please, like one thing I would like to say is that you may not need as much time. everybody has a very different scope, but keeping a lot more time allotted to each of these things gives you enough freedom. If things go hayway, you can always course correct, and there is enough time to get back on track, essentially. So that is my perspective, but there is no objective answer as to, okay, this is how much time you should spend. But the idea is that keep enough scope for things that may go not as planned, which happens all the time, and you would be able to easily meet all the application deadlines without stressing too much. I think the most stressful part is after you have submitted and you wait for the results. But yeah, applying is definitely easier because you are constantly busy. After that, once you are done with it, then you're left alone with the anxious thoughts of where you're getting in and where you're not. So that, yeah, that I think is roughly the timeline, at least that I followed, I guess.
I also heard that it's kind of difficult to get slots for GRE, IELTS, and TOEFL, so that also you should keep in mind to get those slots early on.
That's true. That's a good point. I don't recall exactly how, like, what were the issues that I faced, but I definitely recall that there are limited slots because there are limited number of slots in different centers per day that are allotted. So it's good to talk to people who are going through the process. Talk to seniors. Talk to people who have already started their masters or a PhD program, and they would have still have it fresh in their memory, and maybe the systems have changed slightly, so they may know what the new logistical changes are. And I think they like I would definitely suggest like reaching out to people and asking. It's not very easy to do it. I know most of the people may or may not respond. That's definitely there, but the idea is that the more you can get to know from people who have recently gone through the same process, the better your decision making can be, I guess. And the more informed you will be, at least, of what to avoid and what to. Yeah.
Right, makes sense. Just one thing which I noticed when you guys were preparing was to join a good research group as early as possible to start working under some good professor with some good research group so you can publish in good conferences and journals, which will really help you to stand out in your applications.
That is true. I think, I mean, it's the same as somebody who would want to have an industry experience, would like to get into big tech firms as interns as early as possible. So that's the same ideology that you would like to follow. And the idea behind gaining some research experience early was, as you said, to try and improve our chances of getting into good universities, getting good PhD advisors. So that was primarily the reason, at least getting that exposure as early as possible, because it's an ongoing process. Again, you make mistakes, you learn, and you understand newer things almost every time you are part of a project. And I think that is true for any kind of project, be it a research project or not. So yes, that definitely helped because it allowed me to gain more exposure personally as to what are the things that I'm more interested in, because there's not just one kind of research project. There could be several different kinds. There are a lot of categories of publications that people are interested in. So these are all the things that you would get to know once you are part of that process, or at least helping somebody who's like, as I was helping a PhD student who was already there at one of these research. So I think that exposure really helped me get more informed, at least at the time. And then there are personal experiences that also helped me take my decisions. But uh, yes, uh, I think from first year onwards, I knew that I wanted to, as I think mentioned earlier as well, that I wanted to go outside India to get some more academic experience. And I started my homework thinking about as to what are the things that may be required. So I know that a good research experience may have possibly made my application for a master's program slightly better as well, because I think it is really very competitive. Always has been, of course. So it helped me get into a PhD program. That's a separate thing. But that's how at least that was the perspective from where I started at least at that.
Right, makes sense. So that's great. I think we've covered the first part of the discussion. Like moving on to the next part. So assuming that we've done everything right, got into PhD. So what are the next step? What happens next?
I think then you are in one of the most challenging courses of like programs of your life. But maybe the way I understand the question is at least how uh, what are the things that would initially come in your way when you start as a PhD student, if I'm understanding correctly.
Right. So, I mean, once your application is accepted, like, what are the next steps essentially? Like, you have to go for your visas, start relocating, and then initially when you get into the program, or initially from your first day into PhD, what things come your way and all those stuff.
Yes, so the visa process is definitely the most important thing that you would want to get done as early as possible. So you look for the F1 student visa slots. Speaking of US, you would look for an F1 visa slot appointment. I had an in-person interview as well. So there's fingerprinting, which is the logistical part as step one, and then there's the in-person interview. And once the interview is cleared, your visa is processed. The next step is yes, figuring out the local logistics at the place where you could be going to pursue your program, which includes getting the accommodation, understanding the commute that you would be taking on a regular basis to the university and back from your accommodation, and looking for roommates. A lot of universities have Facebook housing groups. That really helped me, at least at the time in the beginning, where I tried reaching out, asking people who people were looking for roommates, and who were already there, and I was also looking for roommates. I had to come there, so things worked out that way. But figuring out accommodation, figuring out the transport, yes, and that pretty much gets you to a good start in the beginning, uh, at least a smooth start. There are a lot many uncertainties that would come your way because it's a new place, new environment, very new, very different academic experience compared to what we get in India. So a very different culture for sure. So those are the different things that would change, but at least logistically, once these things are figured out, I think the rest is every individual can figure out for themselves. I'm very for sure. Um, Once you are already a PhD program in a PhD program, I think that question has many more answers because different labs work in different ways. Some already have defined projects that you would be put onto, and you would start working on them from day one. From my personal experience, I was uh, there was no specific project that my advisor asked me to work on. At least, yes, there are some projects that you would have to work for the grant that you are being funded from. So that is one. And secondly, I tried working with the senior PhD students at the time, and I think that really helped me. And I worked on a very wide range of topics. Like I worked on a research paper that was in robotics. I worked on a research paper um, that was on cybersecurity. So I mean, just as just for some examples here, I kept exploring my options. I took the initiative. I think that is the most important thing that somebody would expect out of you as a PhD student, that you take the initiative, you try to see if you're not sure what you want to do, you explore a lot many more options because as much as it's important to understand what you want to do, I think it's really really important to understand what you don't want to do because you would be committed to a specific direction for a really really long time, and it's not like you would never change, but the idea is that that would really form the core of your PhD, and even that changes during the duration, but at least it gives you a start, and that is really really important because you would be willing to commit time from your life, from your personal life, towards solving those problems. And I think That's why it's really, really important for you to be very sure, or for anybody to be very sure that that's what they want to work on. So I think short answer, initiative is the most important thing that you would be expected um, to have right from day one, no matter what kind of PhD lab or logistics you are part of. But that would really help as much as you keep yourself busy, keep exploring, keep your like keep figuring out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. I think it should be fine.
Makes sense. And while you're doing your PhD, so apart from the regular curriculum, what other things or what other opportunities do you get? Like you mentioned that there's RA, then you also did your research internship in a big tech company. So I'm assuming that's a corporate internship. And then you might be working under some professor. So what all opportunities do you get?
So the general idea is PhDs are funded now that they can be funded with a typically there are fellowships and everything which have different criteria, but typically you could be either a TA or an RA. And over again, typically most of the duration of a PhD you would be an RA. At times you can be a TA. Maybe you would be asked to be a TA in the beginning, get some exposure or experience being a TA as well. So then that's some additional workload, but it can be very beneficial because you are like it just gives you a very different experience other than just being a student. So I think that's pretty much. I was in my lab. The system has been that every alternate semester when my advisor teaches the course, the new student or new students, a couple of new students, PhD students are a TA at least once. So that really has been the sort of a tradition as to how things have been in my life. But it definitely helps. And otherwise, I have been an RA most of the other times. But it like subjectively it depends pretty much on what kind of funding the advisor is getting. So there's no fixed rule as to what you would be required to do, but it can be either one of these most very commonly. Coming to the internship part, so I'm not very sure as to what rules apply for other universities, but ASU allows for 3 summer internships, a maximum of 3 summer internships, and then there is a general rule that a PhD student in the US on an F1 visa category can do up to 52 weeks of curricular practicum training, which is what we call as CPT in short, which essentially comprises of internships during the course of the PhD. So you are expected not to exceed 52 weeks. In fact, it's recommended to be maybe like 4 or 5 weeks short of the total. So just to be on the safe side, and that's strictly due to visa requirements. Um, but yeah, that's the general idea as to for doing the internship. Then you can also opt for co-op positions, which are essentially that you would be working during the spring or the fall semester yeah, as an intern, as well as be a part-time student. I think I have never done a co-op, so I'm not very confident as to how the logistics work for that. But once you are through with your total number of credits in your PhD program, you can do an internship without like a 40-hour internship, 40-hour weekly internship uh, during the spring and fall. So that is not a co-op essentially. And in co-op, the difference I forgot to mention, but the difference is that you are only allowed to be 20 hours of you're only allowed 20 hours per week for the internship instead of the typical full time, which is 40. So those are essentially the kind of opportunities that would arise, and yeah, that I think sums up the answer.
So just a follow-up, like what exactly is the benefit of doing a co-op?
Uh, I think added experience. People try to diversify their options just to explore at least. Uh, I think that could primarily be the reason that you would want to have uh, more duration in a specific company. For example, consider that you joined a company as a full-time intern, which is a 40-hour intern during the summer. And then maybe there are project requirements that you are very much involved in that project and the company wants you to spend more time. So you may want to extend that internship into the following semester, which would be the fall semester. So that could be a very common requirement as well, based on where the project is going and how involved you are and how. Yeah. So essentially, that could be the reason, one of the reasons. And some people opt for a different company for interning during the fall or spring, as to what they did in summer. And that is where I was, I think, coming from, that you just want to diversify your options essentially. So that those are pretty much the reasons that I have at least seen some of my colleagues who have taken a co-op.
Got it. And like just building up on this, like what are the most common paths pursued by people after PhD?
Okay. One of the questions that I kept searching on Google at the time I was applying. So mm, first and foremost, joining the academia, and taking an academic position, and that could be directly as an associate assistant professor, or you can also do a postdoc, and then look for at least spend more time working more closely with another professor, and then go for an academic position. So I at least club the two together. But that is the academic route. The second would be the industry R&D, where you would join a research group or a research oriented group, um, at but at any of the uh, corporate industries, corporate companies, essentially. And the third most common that I have seen is definitely going for startups. And there are there are more uncertainties, as much as I understand, when you go for a startup. Uncertainties with respect to how the visa processes go, essentially, because you would definitely want to go for an H-1B work visa or some other visa category which allows you to spend more time uh, working on what you want to work on. I'm not very sure or knowledgeable to answer that part, but I've seen quite, I have come across quite a few PhDs who have gone through that process as well. So those are the three most commonly seen prospects, I would say.
Right. And from what I know that you're mostly aiming for the corporate R&D positions. So just wanted to ask like how is the current job market? Are people getting jobs in the R&D positions? Because we've seen that there's a rise in R&D positions due to this whole AI revolution. But before that, a lot of companies were even laying off their R&D teams to cut down on their budgets and everything. So how is the current situation?
So coming first on to how R&D positions are affected by these company decisions, and as much as I understand from the discussions I've had with seniors and people who are already working, um, I think it's a general understanding that R&D people are the first ones to be laid off, because naturally, I mean, speaking from a very corporate point of view, I would assume that you would want to maintain the products or the or like essentially your products or the frameworks that are getting you more money than looking for newer problems to solve. So it definitely like is a question that brings in the point of how scalable the things are, how scalable the company is, where you are working, or how much limelight you are getting for the project that you are. Maybe your research project is at the core of what the company's next steps are. So there are no like objective boundaries to this answer, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that uh, publishing would definitely get a second priority over building more products that would get you more revenue. If I am the head of a company, I think that's how I would think as well. So yes, you are right that earlier there were a lot of layoffs in the R&D departments at least, and now currently I am still at a stage where I'm yet to apply for full-time roles in my PhD. So I'm not very sure as to um, how the market has changed, I would say, but at least seeing my colleagues who are about to graduate in the next 3 or 4 months, uh, people have been getting good offers. And most of my friends have gotten into the big 5 or 6 companies that we keep hearing of, at least. So, yes, there are requirements as long as you are. I think one of the most important things that is expected out of PhD, and specifically for people who are about to graduate, is that in case you want a job in the big companies, you would have to be very relevant and in what is currently going on. So a lot of people, as you said, with the AI revolution, specifically with respect to these language models such as ChatGPT, people who are working on that and have the technical know-how as to how to build those from scratch, at the very least, um, are not short of getting any offers, and that's just how the way that's just how the world works, I guess. So it's important to be relevant. It's not like there are no jobs in anything other than this, but the idea is that definitely the requirements keep changing, and the idea and as a PhD, since you are in such an extended timeline, you would want to adapt, or at least learn how to connect what you are doing with what companies would be expecting. And I think that is something that has personally understand, or at least how I should be applying even for research internships, and understanding how understanding this alignment between my work and what is expected from the company's point of view really uh, improves your understanding of how this game works. So the job market is naturally hard, no matter what program you are in, I think, and it's challenging, definitely. But uh, my suggestion is, I think, something that I follow. I don't know, because I'm still far away from getting a full time role, at least. But my ideology is that staying very flexible with respect to, and being trying to be as relevant as possible, keeping your interests in mind, of course, because you do not want to deviate from where you want to take your PhD, essentially. So, keeping a balance between those two things is really, really important in terms of finding the right companies or the groups to work in.
Sure, definitely. So I guess that's all from my side. I think I've asked almost all the questions that I had. Is there something that you would like to add in case I missed something important?
So, one of the things that somebody like a lot of undergraduate and master students that I have met and have asked me, who were interested in doing a PhD, and my initial responses are always discouraging as to please don't do a PhD. The reason I discourage people in the beginning is that you should be, or anybody should be, interested enough to commit this long of a duration of their life, uh, despite somebody discouraging them. And my reason is like, yes, I would be happy if somebody would want to do it, but the idea is, even if I'm trying to stop you, you should be interested enough to make that commitment. Uh, and the idea is that, and the reason as to why I personally do this is because, um, at the very at the end of the day, I think there's no PhD who would have thought of leaving the program at least once. At least once, I would say. But during the time you have that thought, it is you need to uplift yourself, and that's where you need the determination of thought as to why you decided to do that PhD. So it's an extremely up and down ride, um, for most of the people. I think there's nobody who says that I had a very smooth PhD experience. But in general, like, you should be very sure and confident that you are doing it for yourself and not for somebody else, because it's your PhD. And that is the reason why I ask people as to why do they want to do a PhD, or if not, uh, like the otherwise it would be like, why do you not want to do a PhD, sort of a question. But anyway, that's something I would like to add. But that's pretty much from my side, I guess.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And when we used to be in college, uh, it was really peculiar of someone to select PhD. And when you told us, we could see how motivated you were and how encouraged you were. And I think that made us also confident that he's actually making a right decision. Like it was really inspiring for us as well. So I kind of know where you're coming from. Yeah. So
Thank you for mentioning that actually, because yeah, I think I lost memory of that specific incident, but it's good to recall that. I mean, one thing I would definitely mention is that I have been very fortunate to have met Siddharth and the rest of the people in my friend group, in our common friend group uh, during our undergrad, because everybody was really really ambitious, still is, and I think that pushed each one of us to go for something that we were interested in. And despite the fact that everybody would have had everybody naturally has a very different timeline or a timeline for their careers and the paths that they take. But in general, having such an positive influence around you really helps you stay on the line for sure. Because yes, everybody has days that they may not want to pursue certain things, or they feel low as to, and they question themselves as to why they are doing it. But it definitely helped me, so I am very grateful for that even today. And yeah, I guess that's all from our time at undergrad that I would definitely cherish at least.
yeah, definitely. So I think that was a lot of info and some really useful info for someone who's planning to pursue PhD or is already pursuing it. Thanks again for joining, Siddhant. And thanks everyone for
Thank you
watching.
so much.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for watching this video. In case if you have any more questions, feel free to drop it in the comment section below. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Till then, take care and keep learning.